welcome all of you to this afternoon's launch of my book, Malaysia's New Economic Policy in its first decade, 1971 to 1980. I'm happy to see friends here, some of whom I've not met for quite some time. So it's really a very happy afternoon for me to be able to see so many of you, including old friends. I would like to thank in particular Jomo Sundaram, who will be launching the book together with a few of us in a short while. Jomo is a very old friend who was my colleague in UKM way back in the mid-70s, or slightly past the mid-70s at the University of Kebangsaan, Malaysia. Together with Ramana Mo, who was there earlier, we had very useful discussions on a wide range of topics, from economics to politics to culture. And I must not forget to mention Ishak Shari, the late Ishak Shari, who was also my colleague and later Jomo's colleague as well in the Faculty of Economics at UKM. So together we formed that group, and I thought, thinking back, that was a group that engaged in really very useful, productive discussions. So I have to admit that my own intellectual development was very much enriched through those kinds of discourses, exchanges, and engagements. Now you might want to know why I chose this topic. Somebody asked me, why did I choose to study the New Economic Policy? And why did I choose to study the state? By the way, when I first told some of my colleagues in UKM that I was going to do my doctoral dissertation on the subject of the state, then they said, how come you never tell me which state you are studying? Must be Penang, I think, since you are from there. The state that I studied, of course, refers to the institutions, the organs of power, the people who hold power at these different organs, their ideological inclination, and how this has influenced policy making. My interest in the state was actually aroused through my own personal involvement in activism. But at that stage, in 73, 74, it was at a lower scale. In 74, I remember, there was the Tasik Utara squatter protest against being evicted, for their land to be taken to make way for a golf course for the rich. And later, several months later in the same year, up north in Bali, peasants protested against the falling prices of rubber. They were hungry, they were poor. But the state reacted harshly against them. The students throughout the country went on demonstrations. The university lecturers joined in. Some of my friends who are here today joined in. And they were harassed, some were even detained under the Internal Security Act. So it dawned upon me that what I learned from my university courses, that the state is a tool of development, that the state mobilizes resources to develop and grow the economy. I think the state is more than that. The state uses force if necessary to crush protests in order to protect certain interests. Then I asked, what interests? It was then that I became interested in the subject of the state. But of course, the state is a difficult subject, and my knowledge of the subject was very shallow indeed at that point. Then Jomo introduced me to the subject. He introduced a lot of literature on the subject to me, and I read them and I became very interested. But for whatever reason, Jomo has not told me until today, he didn't want me to be his student. Maybe he wasn't my formal supervisor for my PhD at the University of Malaya. That job fell on V. Selvaratnam, who is seated there, to whom I owe a deep debt of gratitude. And likewise to Lim Kok Cheong, Dr. Lim Kok Cheong. I'm not sure where Kok Cheong is today. He probably has migrated somewhere. But the two of them took up the job of being my supervisor. I thank them because they guided me very competently, and I completed my thesis in 1982. The book that will be launched in a while is Malaysia's New Economic Policy, based on the period which actually is the first decade of the NEP, 71 to 80. Now I'm sure you would want to ask me, heck, you finished it in 82, to this year is 2024, 2024 minus 1982 is a good 42 years. Why did it take you such a long time to publish it? Yeah. Well, the reasons were largely personal. And if I were to tell you, and I will, you probably have not so good an opinion of me. I joined Gerakan in 1982, shortly after I completed my PhD. That was the year when the Chinese education movement, Dong Zhong and Xiao Zhong, better known by their acronym Dong Xiao Zhong, felt that there was an existential threat to Chinese schools, and that threat must be overcome. Otherwise, Chinese schools would lose their character, and so they thought. And interestingly, they felt that maybe we should go into the arena of the state and compete and get the matter resolved. So they supported two candidates from Gerakan to participate in the 6th general elections. At that point in time, I have to admit, I supported that position. And I went to help one of them in Kapong. We lost. And later, I joined the party. And soon after joining the party, I discussed with some of them as to whether I should publish a thesis. By the way, the thesis was accepted for publication by a quite established and well-known publisher. But they said, look, you know, from what you have told us, the content seemed quite contrarian, you know, to the thinking of the leaders of the Barisan Nasional, of which Party Gerakan was a component party. And since you have joined and you are going to play a key role, maybe you should delay it. And I delayed it, and I delayed it and delayed it until just about 2 or 3 years, several years ago, before COVID, Selva and Raja Rasya told me, maybe you should rethink. So I did, and it was only last year that I decided maybe I should publish it. So I published it. Now my book is about the state. I want to look at what is the role of the state in development planning. And in playing that role, will certain interests come in to play a big part in impacting development planning and development policies. Now, class as a social category of analysis, except for work by Jomo and a few others, was rarely used. Already then, it was mainly race, and of course in recent years increasingly it has been religion. But I thought the state, the people who hold power, people who have the power to make decisions, serve certain class interests, especially the interests of the upper strata, and their main job is to preserve capitalism so that these interests are served. Now, at that point in time, there were three categories of capitalists. One, the foreign, largely British colonial capital, owning the plantations, the mines, and commerce, and trade. Then you have the comprador, largely Chinese capital, and well, the Malays hardly had any capitalists. The aristocratic class within the Malay community held very senior positions in the bureaucracy. And then you have some lower middle class comprising largely of teachers, but the main bulk of them were poor peasants. So that was the social structure of the Malays as I understood it to be. So through UMNO, they control power. They had power, but they have no economic base. And as the years go by, especially after May 13, 1969, the more nationalistic stratum within UMNO felt that there was a need for them to create an economic base, especially for the emerging capitalist class. And they felt state power was the best. And Abdul Razak Hussein, who became the Prime Minister after 69, in 71 if I'm not mistaken, was a nationalist, Malay nationalist, and who felt that maybe the assets of the country should be owned by Malaysians, and state power should also be used to create that class of Malay capitalists. So they started public enterprises, they introduced legislations, and so forth. So, now my book looked at the role of the state, its class nature, and how this has impacted development planning, and specifically how through restructuring, corporate ownership, employment, poverty eradication, and through education, how class interests have played a big part. Even in areas such as poverty eradication, meant directly to eradicate poverty. And I feel they were serious about eradicating poverty. But even then, within the realm of capitalist social order, most of the benefits actually accrued to groups that were not targeted. So the book is largely about that. Now, I would like to assert that though already 42 years late, it's still relevant. Relevant because I think the use of state power to accumulate, especially by the leaders in the governing stratum, is very much so in practice today. And I think it has gotten even worse. It has gotten to an even more extreme level. I do not think Tun Abdul Razak would have accepted using state power to accumulate for private individuals the way it has been done over the last several years. Using state power to breed that class, to nurture that class is fine. But I think it has gotten worse. But essentially, what I'm trying to say is that the class nature of the state, that means state power being used to serve certain top-level interests, is so very much there. And I feel for that reason alone, the book is relevant. Also, given the fact that the spirit of the NEP is all-pervading, it would be good for anyone studying developmental policy today to go back to the first decade of the NEP, to understand the changing forces that led to the promulgation of the NEP, how laissez-faire was finally rejected, state intervention was introduced. This paradigm shift and the forces that led to it, I think, should be understood. And I think that would be a useful starter for anybody seriously wanting to research into governmental planning and policy today. So thank you once again, my friends, for coming. Thank you very much, Jomo, for coming here to launch the book. Thank you, Rahman, for agreeing to moderate the panel discussion later. Thanks to my two old friends, Kumar, who is president of PSM, and Rajarasya, professor at the University of Malaya. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Toh.